to be chatting with you today, Brian. Um, really excited to dig into some of the stuff you've been up to. So you joined Sprinkler via an acquisition, led demand gen and marketing ops there during a period of hypergrowth when they went from 50 million to 1.8 billion in valuation. And that was more of a top-down sales motion. Would I be getting that right? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Almost entirely. Yeah.
Yeah, because when I went on their website, I noticed there was no like started trial, so I just assumed it was more of an enterprisey type sale.
Mm-hmm.
And then you switched the sales motion completely because at Intercom, that's where we work together. It was very bottoms up, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like essentially the inverse. Like when we joined, there was not the ability to talk to a seller if you wanted to.
Yeah, yeah. And it was cool because Intercom was one of the first companies where I really found out about this new wave of companies that were getting a ton of traction with bottoms up and then layering on sales, right? Like Slack, Intercom.
Mm-hmm.
I think Zoom was probably the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you were leading demand gen and growth marketing at Intercom, and then now you're the SVP of Demand Gen at New Relic, which recently reported 648 million in ARR. That seems astronomical to me because obviously I'm working at a Series A startup right now.
Mm-hmm.
So before we kind of get into the weeds, how did you get into demand gen?
Sure. So I guess, the way but this is, I guess, a good interview tip for anyone who ever interviews for jobs like this is like, I don't really think of myself as a demand gen marketer really at all. I think of I just think of myself, I'm in the business of helping the companies I work for make money. If honestly, if the best way for the company to make money was for somebody to hand me a bag and tell me to just go out and knock on doors, hey, look, as long as the comp model works, okay. And I think that's actually the core of it. Like I've always felt that way about all the jobs I've ever really had. And so as sort of through just happenstance, like I was at my first startup, I was one of the first employees. So like I did everything. I answered phones, I made desks, and I assembled desks, and I actually delivered services to our customers. Like I wrote the statements of work, I pitched, and then I delivered. As that company grew and became clear that we needed folks to do marketing, and that was the best. Again, that same mentality is like, well, if you need me to do, how do we make money? Okay, we need marketers. Great, I'll go figure that out. And so I essentially moved into the marketing discipline, and have sort of stayed in there ever since. And the reason I gravitated, of all the things that a marketer does toward demand, I would say is that it suits my temperament the most to do the aspects of marketing closest to revenue. But for those interested in this career, I would say that you need to be well-rounded in terms of all the disciplines of marketing to be successful. Because anyway, we can go into that whole long thing, but basically, like sometimes because demand's the closest to revenue, we get a lot of the credit for making money. But the truth is, most of that happens outside of the Google search ad you buy or the email you send. Most of that's happening in the brand you're building, the product messaging you're developing, the content you're creating, and things like that. So you need to be well-rounded to do this kind of a job successfully.
You mentioned demand gen suits your temperament. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. So a lot of marketing historically, and a constantly reducing proportion, but nonetheless still a very, very important part, is basically not accountable to anything. Sorry, let me reframe that because that's not fair. It's not accountable to sort of a specific measurable outcome. And the famous quote that people have heard a million times, but is true of how marketing was always run, and to degree certain aspects are today, is I know 50% of my budget are wasted, but I don't know which 50%, is basically the famous saying, which was just how it was. And in a world where there were a very small number of ways to reach a potential customer, and those ways were effectively all unmeasurable unless you were doing really fancy econometrics type stuff that I barely understand, not well enough to speak to in detail. You really couldn't measure it well. But as the world moved online and everything we do online has a fingerprint, our privacy is a fiction, and that's bad for us as people, but great for us as people trying to create companies. The ability to be much more accountable about the outcomes of what you're doing is essentially what's fueled the sort of the rise of the growth marketer, the rise of the demand marketer, is the ability to the term I always use with my teams is we make promises and we keep them. In years past, the only people in a company that could do that on a revenue basis were sellers. And the rise of the demand marketer and growth marketing and all the things I just talked about has allowed marketers to do the same thing. Not, in totality, of course. We have a supply chain we work inside of, but that's a really just different mentality. And so my temperament suits that perspective. I want to make promises and keep them. And when I keep them, I want to be rewarded appropriately. And when I fail, I want to be punished appropriately. And hasn't traditionally been the common point of view for a marketer.
Interesting. So another thing that I was excited to ask you about is you've experienced demand gen marketing ops across multiple companies now. What's the biggest change you've noticed since you've gotten into the business?
I mean, it's a very fast moving space. Like even just the setup sort of story that we talked about is like, how long ago was it? So like when Sprinklr acquired Dotchess Group, which was the startup I worked at, marketing automation wasn't what, like HubSpot seemed like black magic. It was crazy voodoo stuff. And I would talk about other marketers like, oh man, and that's credit to them. It's a wonderful company. They essentially democratized stuff that prior to that required whole engineering teams at huge companies to do. Like the likes of Oracle would do it in-house with all this fancy tech that no one else had. And then HubSpot made it possible for others to do it on a sort of SaaS basis. And so not that market automation is sort of the crux of it, but just it's an example of the explosion of MarTech and the amount of capability it's put in the hands of marketers. Now, the problem is that explosion has made marketers think that their job is MarTech. There's a blog post in there somewhere that I've been sort of noodling on, which is that your job is not MarTech, your job is marketing. People just buy shit, and they shouldn't, but it's a bit of an aside. My point is to say that the last 7-10 years has seen this massive change from a non-technical enabled marketer with a very limited set of ways of reaching their buyer to technically a technology enabled marketer with a massive array of ways to meet their buyer, to understand how, like, what's performing and not performing with their buyer. And so it's caused this huge dislocation and this disruption where, like, honestly, there just are not a lot of marketers alive right now who know how to be effective in light of all that change. And so, yeah, it's a different job, essentially completely. And it puts a big burden on anyone who's been a marketer who isn't starting today but has been doing the job for a while, to reconcile to that is like, yeah, it's a different gig almost completely than it was 10 years ago.
So one of the things that I think everyone agrees on about 2020, it's completely changed the game, right? And there's a lot of new challenges that come from the shift that's happened. There's also new opportunities. But some of the key things, so we work in the dev tool space, selling to infrastructure engineers, things like that. So events were pretty big for us back in the day. But there's no events. Direct mail is iffy at best, right? Most people are just working from home, and asking for someone's home address sometimes is kind of a weird thing to do. And you can't really send stuff to their office anymore. So how do you fill the pipeline gap created by some of these new challenges? Are there new channels you found that tend to be more effective now? And how are you just adjusting to this new reality?
Well, I think COVID has been very, very disruptive for all the reasons you said, so I won't repeat them. But also, like, it's like there's like micro cycles inside of it. Just think about your personal life, right? Like, probably you were initially doing a lot of Zoom happy hours with your friends or using that house party app or whatever. When was the last time you did either of those things? Probably not in months. And I think the business cycle went through a similar thing where there was an initial wave of like, let's try to replicate the things, both the businesses and the people themselves actually were willing to and interested in replicating what life had been like before, but sort of on a one-for-one basis in digital. And that lasted a little while, and that has now stopped. Fatigue has set in, things like that. It's not to say that these techniques don't work at all, but the one-to-one replication of digital of offline into online after coronavirus is over. And now we're I would say in a different phase of much more targeted digital interaction. What I'm seeing works fairly well is, one to few type group environments, facilitated discussion, invitations, things like that. It's very manual, it's very curated. But like, to your point, like if you can't send direct, you literally can't send direct mail. You literally can't do events. You have to do something. So it's kind of moving into a more like high value, one to few type interaction model, I would say, as the replacements for some of that. The other thing is this always mattered, but I think it's more important than ever under these circumstances, because even those things don't work as well because they don't scale as well. You can't get 1,000 people in a room because nobody wants to be in a room with 1,000 people. And so some other things that are working well is you need to conceive of something that is like, and this is hard, but like genuinely interesting. And that kind of falls, I think, into a couple categories. One is personalities. So like human beings, influencers, celebrities, famous people, whatever, just like somebody sufficiently interesting to draw. And then the other thing is, effectively, you could call it, I guess, content. It's perspectives and points of view that are just genuinely interesting. And that's what I would just focus on is like, am I doing anything that, no bullshit, honest to God, is genuinely interesting? And the answer is probably no, but don't kid yourself. So figuring that out is really hard, and it takes some like real reflection, because like you're going to have folks on your team, whether they're sellers or marketers, who don't actually know what is genuinely interesting to their audience and think that, well, we used to run these local happy hours and they were really well attended and developers really loved them and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, but they weren't there because of the keynote at the beginning. They were there to see the other developers and drink on your dime. Well, so you thought it was because the dev meetup was the reason, but it's the social benefits of the dev meetup were why they were attending for. And so now you have none of the social benefits. You only have your little opening keynote, and your little opening keynote was never interesting to begin with. So you need to really deeply understand that, like, you are boring and you don't have alcohol to overcome that. So fix it by being not boring, whether it's through personalities you hire or whatever. So.
Wow. That was one of the funnier things I've heard. It's so true, right? I don't know, this virtual events movement, right? I mean, and I used to love going to SaaStr, and this week I saw the SaaStr, lineup, and I was kind of excited about it, but then it came onto it and I was like, yeah, you know what? I'll just watch the recordings later. Like, I don't need to go to this thing. Mm-hmm. That Cameo app is pretty cool, by the way. I've seen some companies messing around with it. It'd be kind of interesting to get a B2B software version of that, where you have like B2B software influencers that you can kind of connect with. Because one of the things that's challenging is like going out and talking, like, especially in the developer world, and I'm sure you're going to run into this soon. It's like you have these people, like there's Kelsey Hightower, he's like a big deal. Like, being able to connect with those people on a platform and collaborate with them through some sort of platform would be kind of interesting.
Totally. I mean, like, I think you're absolutely right. Like, at Relic, for example, not because of COVID, but certainly like as it relates to COVID, we're making a huge investment in developer relations for this reason. Like, you need faces of your business. And so we're making a really, really meaningful investment in it because, we needed to anyway. It was always important, but it's especially important now for the reason you just shared. So yeah, it's funny. Just yesterday, I got a Cameo. I got ABM'd by way of a Cameo of a B2B person that I know a little bit. It was kind of interesting. It was like not an effective tactic on me specifically, but I think in general, like a very thematically interesting technique. I'm tough to sell to, though. Very, very little stuff actually gets me interested. So yeah, I'm a bad survey of one.
I'm the easiest sell ever. I'm like actively looking to be sold. All right. So you have a good track record of joining the right companies at the right time. And I think that's the key thing people miss. It's like, it's one thing to join the right company, but you also got to figure out when the best time is to join that company. Mm-hmm. And you've done that a couple of times. What advice would you have for a marketer evaluating an offer at a startup? What are some of the key things that they need to know for sure before joining, and maybe some areas that they should look at as red flags?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Um, I think one thing to say is like, look, there's always luck involved, always, always, always. And like, I didn't pick who bought my old startup that I worked at, but it turned out to be a rocket ship that really elevated my career and gave me all these great opportunities to burnish my skills and to learn from other people. And a life-changing thing that I had no control over whatsoever. We could have been bought by some like trash private equity firm and turned into a trash heap, and that also could have happened. So just starting there and acknowledging that there's some luck here. But with that said, I think there are patterns and there's signals. Especially, I'm going to speak to early stage primarily. It sounds like that's the spirit of the question. So,
Yep.
So much of picking the right, let's say, series. Well, it's funny because the series have shifted. There's a lot of money in them. So I don't know. I don't know where to put this cutoff.
Let's do like seed and Series A.
So I'll give you the advice I literally gave somebody a couple months ago. You're picking the founder. The likelihood that that company has like genuine long-term product market fit that's going to get them to an exit is basically zero. And even if they have signals of product market fit or genuine product market fit in the moment, that product market fit will dissipate over time as the market evolves and competitors see them being successful and seek to eat their lunch and all kinds of stuff. So you're betting on a team that not only can get to product market fit and monetize that fit, but then reinvent themselves probably 2 or 3 times over before any good financial outcome happens. And so you're essentially judging not the moment in time, you're judging the momentum and the team that got the momentum. Are they lucky or are they good? And the answer is they're definitely lucky because luck plays a role in everything. So now it's really like, okay, are those momentum indicators in place? Are they lucky? Now, are they good? And the good bit comes down, I would say, to sort of there's a framework that there's a lot of discussion. Is Malcolm Gladwell really the person to look to for frameworks and things? A lot of people have a problem with him, and so be it. But he said something on a podcast that I was listening to that I thought was really interesting, which I have found to be true, which is you sort of need folks who are inspiring, who are good leaders. I like folks who are somewhat humble because I find that I work with them a little bit better and so on. But there's an attribute he called out that I think is really interesting that can be off-putting, but is actually a good thing, which is, are they disagreeable? And a great example of this is when I was interviewing for Intercom, I had my final interview with the CEO, Owen. And Owen's not a disagreeable guy at all. I genuinely, I like him. I would love to just be his friend for the rest of my life. But I would say this, like our initial phone screen was supposed to be video. Something went wrong and it was moved to phone. And we got on the phone. He's like, wait, this isn't a video screen? And he literally just basically hung up. He could have lost a great candidate. I think at least I'm a great candidate over that. But he's like, no, we do this my way. And I can't interview somebody. Now, a less insistent person would have said, oh, okay, I'll figure it out. It's fine. But no, he did it his way. He had his process. And so I would say, like, you're looking for all these indications in the leader that they are smart, that they will learn, that they can reinvent themselves, that they like have pride and ego, but can be humble if they fail, all those things. But I think there's one other one in here, which is like, are they like stubborn in a good way? Are there certain things they will not compromise? And you actually want that attribute. It seems like they're being a jerk, but they're not. Or maybe they are, for all I know. Call it being a jerk, but it's the right kind of jerk. It's a jerk that wins because they are stubborn to win. So that's some of the stuff I would look for at a very early stage company. But again, really, I don't give a shit about the website. It doesn't matter. The product UI can be bad. It's fine. Like, do they have momentum? And is the leadership?
Well, okay. So the leadership stuff I'm clear on. Let's talk about momentum though. Okay. And let's maybe get into the numbers a little bit. Like, what are the metrics you're looking for there to determine momentum? Are you looking for, website visitors, how that's increasing over time? Are you looking at some initial like inbound demo requests, how that's increasing over time?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, you're looking at, depending a little bit on the selling model, but most companies I feel right now are let me start over. The inbound and then retention. Andrew Chen has a great chart, which he basically says what you're looking for when he's looking at investments for very, very early stage speculative investments. It's a chart he shows about user retention flattening over time. And it's like, it's okay if you acquire 100 and there's only 50 that are still around a month later. Well, that's not great, but let's just say it's fine. But does the 50 stay at 50 indefinitely? That's the sign of product market fit. So like, you need to ask these questions around retention. It's like, okay, how are you getting your customers now? Do you have any? Hopefully, yes. How are you getting them? And do they stick around? That's the key thing. If they stick around, there's something here. And you can build on that. If they don't, it's not that the company's core thesis is fatally flawed, but it's that they haven't figured out how to exploit that thesis yet. And that's okay too, if you want to be one of the ones that helps do that, but then ask for more equity, you're taking more risk and so on. Your risk essentially is reduced, and therefore your participation in the upside is reduced at each level of de-risking. So if you just believe in the thesis and the leader, you're taking a big chance and you're likely going to fail. So act accordingly. If they have if they have users and those users stick around after a couple months of the cohort or whatever, a couple of renewals, your risk has been reduced, and act accordingly. If they have a good retention curve and they're getting really good inbound through word of mouth, essentially not through paid, not through sellers, okay, now your risk is even further reduced, and so on. And the best opportunities, if you can find these things, is when all that's happening and they're still willing to give you the equity and the comp package of the not de-risked version. So like, if you can find that rare scenario where they will pay you like it's super risky, but it has been de-risked, that's a wonderful situation to find yourself in. But it's not common. But that's sort of the holy grail if you can get to it.
Okay. Speaking of numbers and early stage companies, what numbers should marketing own at a Series A or even an earlier stage startup? What are some of the basic things that you would recommend for founders to assign to their marketing team, whether it be demand gen or VP of marketing, head of marketing?
Sure. Well, it's a lot of it depends on your selling motion, but so like if it's an outbound selling motion, primary sales led, you're sort of looking for marketing to do two things: enable the sellers and drive inbound leads for the sellers. Basically it. So I would set up, it's not numeric per se, but I would set up like accountability for sales enablement, and like feedback loops on that and stuff like that. And then to answer your real question, the number side of it, it's inbound lead volume and inbound lead quality, and quality as measured by conversion into opportunities and pipeline and ultimately close. So that's what I would assign to the marketing team. In a product-led growth model, more of a bottoms-up construct, you're interested in less web enablement, less sales enablement, much more like a website. The website is the sales team. And so you need a bunch of work around essentially brand and product marketing and messaging, because that has to manifest in the website. It is your sales force. And then so that's not really numeric, but it is very important. So I would set that up. And then numbers wise, you're interested in website traffic quality, and that's measured by its conversion into your sign-up flow, and then the sign-up flow's momentum down into revenue, ultimately to revenue. In either case, you'll notice that ultimately it's revenue, but marketing can only own a portion of that puzzle. In a product-led environment, we have to hand off to the product to actually monetize. And in a sales-led environment, we have to hand off to sales to monetize. And the truth is most companies with momentum are kind of hybrids. And so you end up running those as overlapping funnels, which is a bit complicated, but I think very doable. So yeah, that's kind of how I would think about it. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. And early on in this conversation, you were talking about how marketing back in the day didn't have any hard numbers, or some roles didn't have hard numbers to be held accountable to. When you look at it now, and when you're talking about the numbers that the marketing team should own, how do you look at that across different functions in marketing, right? Because you talked about brand, you talked about product, demand gen's easy, but outside of demand gen, are you still going to be assigning specific numbers to your functions, or?
No, what you do is you assign the demand gen's team's targets are essentially the marketing team's targets. They should be the same. So marketing should be accountable to whether demand gen succeeds, or growth marketing, whatever you want to call it. But other functions in that team can't carry a number per se. It just doesn't work. Like you can't give a designer a number. So instead what you say to them is, marketing in totality is responsible for a certain amount of signups, and then let's say signups. Let's just say that, simple enough. Now the demand team is monitoring that like a hawk every single day, thinking about ways to optimize, improve it, fix broken parts of the funnel, whatever the case may be. The designer is reacting to projects spawned by the urgency to achieve the number of signups. And so like in the marketing all hands, you talk about signups, but you don't in the one-on-one with the designer say to them, you didn't drive any signups this week, because that's a ludicrous question. So they're inside the projects that are being created by marketing in totality to drive more signups. And some of those are not measured, are things like we need a good blog. And again, the writer perhaps of the blog maybe doesn't carry a sign-up number, but they're a part of the puzzle. So the blog's purpose is to drive broad-based awareness, it's not super measurable, and inbound traffic, which is super measurable, and newsletter signups, which is super measurable. And then because we can monetize traffic and signups, and it has a digital fingerprint that you can track. So you say, okay, there's all this benefit that I can't totally quantify, but I do believe exists. And then there's all this benefit I can quantify. So if marketing's goal is to sign up, and the writer's role in that process is inbound organic traffic and SEO and signups that come off of that, now we're starting to make some headway. And so it really varies by role. The designer, you don't talk about signups except for at all hands. The writer, you actually do, but you talk about the subset of them that you've, using whatever attribution model you've chosen, you're attributing to their particular discipline, and so on. Does that make sense?
No, that's a good. I said no, it doesn't make sense, but what I meant to say is no, yes, it does make sense. Okay, one of my favorite things that I've heard you say in the past, because sometimes I get pushback when I say this, is you mentioned one of the common mistakes you see at early stage startups is they scale sales too fast. So what are some of the key metrics that companies should be looking at and analyzing before making a decision to scale the sales team?
Sure. And this is, I have strong opinions about this, and I have some experience with it, but I will say, like, I'm not like a career-long sales ops professional. So there's others that can really get into the detail here. But in essence, I'll explain the thematic problem, and then I'll explain what I think are some of the answers to it. So the thematic problem is basically, what often happens is you hire a rep and they crush it. And then you hire another one and they crush it. And you're like, okay, well, I need to make $10 million next year. And if 2 reps got me $2 million, well, then 10 reps will get me 10, right? And it doesn't work that way. That's just not how life is. You have the same problem. And that's true for any acquisition channel, by the way. I ran 1 ad and I made $1. I made 2 ads and I made $2. If I run 100 ads, do I make $100? And the answer is no. There's like these diminishing marginal gains that you hit with any acquisition methodology, including sales. But people kind of get that ads don't work that way, but they don't understand that about sellers. And because there's these limiting factors for sellers. Like, let's say you have a pure outbound model, because it's the easiest one to conceptualize. Like you can't just continue cutting patches down smaller and smaller and smaller and just putting reps in them and giving them the same quota and assuming it'll add up to your number. But businesses do this all the time, like constantly. It doesn't stand to reason, and yet it happens all the time with startups. And so, like, I know it sounds sort of dumb, but the truth is that happens. So I'm saying the dumb thing out loud so people don't do the dumb thing. And so when you ask now to pivot over to some of the things you're looking at, like the core question is, can I feed these reps? Like, okay, whatever the quota I want out of them, can I feed it? Can I actually, a term I learned from my old CEO, which I really like, is, can I win on paper? How actually will these reps hit their quota? What proportion is going to come inbound from the website, and what will actually convert? and what proportion is going to come from them calling on accounts, and how many accounts are there that are addressable, and can they actually succeed? This is not fancy math. This is pretty simple. How many leads did the website create last month? Put some reasonable assumption on top of it that if we give marketing some money, they'll grow it by 15%. Let's take some base case conversion rate and say, okay, that means for every rep, we're going to be able to deliver 8 good leads a month. 2 will become revenue later. This, remember, it takes time. And so in a quarter, 2 of those will become money. And at our average deal size, whatever. Okay, if the rep needs to make $1 million and that represents 300K, awesome. I've solved for 300K. What about the other 700? That means the rep's going to be calling. Are there enough buyers? Can they actually call? Have we equipped them to call? And are we sending 2 different reps into the same patch to call the same people? Have we double counted accounts, which happens a lot? And is there enough? Is there just enough? And hopefully there is. But if not, you need to stop and say, okay, we need to drive up our ASP, time to raise prices. We need to improve our conversion rates, time to bring in a selling methodology. We need to get marketing to, instead of filling 30%, they need to fill 50. Great. Marketing, instead of growing it by 15% year on year, can you grow it by 30 if we give you enough money? And so on. So you need to have that discussion before you put reps in seats. But many companies do not do this, even big companies. Sales does not scale linearly, and marketing doesn't scale linearly. And so you need to understand that and address the problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was a great answer. I might send this clip to our board next time they put pressure on me to hire more reps. I'm gonna be like, listen to what Brian has to say.
Well, I mean, look, like I said, those first 2 can work, and sometimes you can take it from 2 to 50 and not hit that problem because there's so much demand in the market. You're not slicing the patches too thin. But like, I remember this poor rep, this poor guy. He's a really sweet man. I really like him. Used to sit next to. I had the SDR team based in Austin. And the SDR team was really clicking, firing all cylinders. We were delivering a lot of revenue to the business. And we had reps all across the country making a fortune. And so they're like, well, great, Texas is a big state. Let's put a rep in Austin and he can have this huge geographic patch. But they didn't think about the fact that like we were selling a product that was only really adoptable by companies that had huge consumer audiences. It just was a fact of life of our product. And he was in a patch that was all B2B. There was no demand in that patch. So everyone's always kicking the shit out of this guy. Like, you have all of Texas and you're not making any money? It's like, yeah, but how many actual accounts in Texas can buy this product and are willing to pony up? Our product was expensive, 200K plus per year to really get going with it. Like, what was his actual addressable patch? It wasn't about the size of the state. It wasn't about the size of the economy of that state. And so like this very sophisticated company that was making money hand over fist in all these areas around the country was basically fucking this guy over. And, he should have known better than to take the job, but we should have known better than to hire somebody to do the job. And we cycled through like 4 reps in this patch before we realized what was wrong. And so like, that's your board's not wrong, but they're not right either.
It's a good intention, right? But I think just throwing reps into new territories that are unproven or don't have any sort of momentum and expecting a sales rep to go in there and generate momentum from scratch tends to be an expensive mistake. I'll just leave it at that. Yeah. So speaking of reps not having enough pipeline, a thing that comes to mind in general is just how do you bounce back from a miss, right? The conversation that you and I had last week, or it was like 2 weeks ago now, where you were talking about how at your level, when you're running a marketing org or a demand gen org, it's very metrics driven. You're committing to a number of SQLs. So think about a time where you committed to a number you missed, and then what was your process from bouncing back?
I have a T-shirt here somewhere that my old team made me, which is that like I actually don't have that much of a bouncing back problem. I think again it goes to my temperament. The T-shirt says that I'm a naive optimist. And I try to be that, like every day is a new day kind of perspective. And I think that's extremely healthy and important for a seller to adopt that perspective, and same for an accountable marketer. I don't think I'm breaking news by saying that, like you just can't dwell on losses. You need to, the terminology I like to use is you need to intellectualize the losses. You need to really deeply try and understand why you were wrong or what went wrong or why you failed, but you can't emotionally carry them with you. And And that's a hard thing to do, but is really important. So to answer your question in more detail, it's like, okay, we missed. Hopefully you knew you were going to miss well in advance. And if you didn't know, that tells you something. Did I know I was screwed a month before? Because sales and marketing is not, you don't, I can't tell you the number of times I've gotten a phone call from a panic CEO or a panic marketer or a panic, like, we're about to, there's 2 weeks left in the quarter, we're going to miss what to do. It's like, how are you finding this out now? Pipeline reporting is a thing. It is not a new discipline. If you didn't have the leads, you probably should have known that 3 months ago. So first question is, did you know you were going to miss or not? If not, you need to really think about what your canaries in the coal mine are and how you figure out, you figure out what these signals are much earlier. So you actually do have some time to do something about it. Next thing is, okay, well, it happened. Why? It's often a function of you either picked the wrong number, which doesn't mean you sometimes you have to pick the wrong number. Like sometimes, well, we're trying to raise and we need to grow it by X%. So it doesn't matter. We have to, this is the number, find a way. Other times you had the opportunity to negotiate the number a little and you were wrong in your assumptions. So if it's the first one, okay, well, screw it. The CFO told you, so you did it and you failed. You went down swinging. Why did you fail? Again, intellectualize that. The other one is we had the chance to negotiate the number and we did it wrong. Okay, where did this go wrong? Was it in the inbound lead volume? Was it that we had a big program and it didn't deliver the way we thought and all those things? It's important then when you are making your decisions to have a hypothesis, like a theory for everything you're doing, even loosely. We think if we spend more on ads, something will happen. That way, when you miss, you say, oh, well, we thought it would do it. We wrote down that we thought we would do it. When we failed, we looked back and we said, that was it. That one right there. That was our wrong assumption. An example of this I've experienced is sort of companies can get these nice tailwinds and it's kind of free money. People are just Googling you, showing up, putting in leads or signing up for stuff or whatever. And I had made an assumption that that would continue at the same rate. And it didn't. Less people were just showing up. And suddenly a key part of my plan failed me. And so when we missed, I was like, well, there you go. I was wrong. And I naively assumed that would continue. And I didn't have a mitigation for it. I didn't have early warning signals that it wasn't working. And so then when we failed, that was why. And so that's what I would say. And then so the next phase is you intellectualize all that. It's like, okay, what are you going to do differently? And usually that requires how do I put it? You prescribe more tactics than you need to succeed, knowing that you are going to be wrong in a bunch of spots. So you kind of like the modeling way to do this in planning is establish your base case. What would happen if I did nothing? Now, what interventions will I do to achieve different scenarios? And how do I make sure I have more interventions than I need? So that the probability of me failing is low. And that's how I would think about it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's a great framework. I've been reading it. The reason I asked that question is because I've been reading a lot of things on stoicism recently. I've been reading a lot of like Ryan Holiday. I just recently picked up the David Goggins book, You Can't Hurt Me. It's all about just like mindset and bouncing back.
Totally,
right?
yeah.
It's like a topic that
I think I have an unfair advantage that I bounce back faster than most. But I very much is a mentality. It's like, look, I'll be honest. Like I literally just this morning, I'm not joking, I'm not exaggerating. I was standing there having my morning coffee. I'm blessed to have a very beautiful view from my home. It's a 3-story apartment, 3rd-story apartment in a neighborhood that's all 2 stories. So we get a really nice view. And literally I was saying, you're going to be dead pretty soon. But I don't mean that in like a dark way. I mean that in like, so I missed
it.
And I think that's a key part of why I'm an optimist, in a lot of ways. It's like, that's right. Today's a new day.
The pain is temporary, right? It's exactly. Finite.
Totally. And look, like, okay, you failed, you missed, you got fired, you get a new job and you do better. Like you're not going to not eat. You're not going to not work. I don't have a trust fund. I don't think you do either. So like, okay, like what else honestly, what are you going to do? I don't have a time machine and I'm going to be dead soon. So just kind of.
I love it, man. That's so good. Okay, I know we don't have that much time left, so I just want to get a couple more quick questions. One is, what advice would you have for founders who are looking to bring on their first marketing hire? Because I've seen founders make this mistake where they may bring in a brand marketing person when they actually need a product marketer or a demand gen. Is there any questions that they can ask themselves to determine that?
Yeah, I mean, I get this question constantly, and there are some patterns. It's hard to know exactly what to do without the specific nature. But like, I'll give you an example. I was talking with a CEO the other day. She wants to make her first like more senior marketing hire, and she's basically saying to me, "Look, I've been screwing around a little bit with Facebook ads, and they seem to work." Okay, well, and she's like, I think I should hire somebody to do Facebook ads. So, oh, okay. If your immediate problem right now is scaling inbound demand and Facebook ads are working, that's totally reasonable. I did guide her to say, the one thing to note is that you can outsource ad buying. You can't outsource a lot of other marketing disciplines. So if you think that in a few months, your new problem will be product marketing, let's say, you actually might want to hire the product marketer now and outsource the Facebook stuff for now. So the reason I bring this up is an important framework to ask yourself is, okay, what do I need to have in-house versus what can I outsource? And marketing disciplines vary widely in your ability to do that. Product marketing and thought leadership, category creation is very, very hard to outsource. Advertising is very easy. So that's like a good framework. What is my priority and what do I have to have in-house versus not? Because marketers are not all the same and all marketing disciplines are not all the same. So that's helpful. Another one is a lot of times companies will be like, I hear a lot is like, we just raised our Series A and we got $100 million, which is crazy that a Series A is $100 million these days, but it happens. We haven't done a penny of marketing and the board wants us to scale, so we're going to hire marketers. It's like, well, slow down. We talked about the momentum stuff before. Where is that momentum coming from? So do a little bit of an analysis. Is it organic? Is it paid? Is it the outbound sellers just calling and so on? And that can help guide you too about where to put your early marketing hires. And then I suppose I wish I had a more structured, like frameworky answer for this, but these are just some of the things I've talked to founders about lately. And then I suppose the last thing is like, where are you going? And are you, and how quickly? So of course everyone wants to build like the next Airbnb or something, but it's more about, okay, 12, 18 months. What is my actual marketing strategy likely to be? Most founders don't know. But I would say that it's worth it to at least have a hypothesis you're going to drive. So that CEO I've mentioned, she believes that her focus is going to be paid acquisition, and that can get her to her next funding round. Somebody else just raised a bunch of money, and you presented a deck to get $100 million. On what basis did you justify this? Where's your momentum coming from? And can you extrapolate, a line from where you are to where you're going to go, and just have a theory. And the last thing is I would just say, like, just kind of want to, especially early stage, you want to hire for horsepower, less for specific sort of discipline in most cases, because you're probably wrong about your theory. You need one, but you're probably wrong. And so people who are versatile will be very, very valuable in those early days, versus people who are highly specialized, because if you're wrong, and you probably are, about the specific way you're going to get to the next plateau, if you've built the team for that, only that trajectory and only that pathway, you're not going to be able to repurpose them quickly.
All right. Last question. You recently joined New Relic as the SVP of Demand Gen. What roles are you hiring for right now?
I have a lot of hiring to do. Probably the biggest thing we're building out right now is like the growth marketing discipline, and with particular emphasis on sort of usage expansion type stuff. So our pricing and packaging is built around consumption. It's a consumption model, and that's a relatively new thing. We launched that like less than 6 months ago, and so it requires a shift in the team talent profile, and bringing in some additional people with a different set of skills around taking users from early user utilization of the product and into deep utilization of the product to increase and drive consumption. So that's a big area of focus. And broadly speaking, it's a big area of focus in our whole industry right now. Famously at Intercom, our old boss Des used to always say, retention is the new conversion. And like that's actually a little bit hyperbolic. It's not exactly true. They're separate and both important. But he is right in that like user retention, user expansion is the essence of a successful SaaS business. Like it's that curve I talked about with user retention or customer retention. It's the essence of it, especially for consumption-based businesses. And so we need to get good at it in a hurry because we basically have to sing for our supper every day with these users now when we've moved to this pricing model.
Brian, it's been awesome talking to you, man. Really appreciate you taking the time and joining me today. And best of luck with scaling things at New Relic. I mean, they're already pretty big, but I'm excited to see how big they are once you start running your programs over there.
Thanks so much, man. Thank you for having me. It was really great talking to you.